The train arrived in Snow Station, and Neptune and Isla gladly agreed to pose for pictures with their respective admirers. Neptune agreed to take off his shirt for pictures, much to the annoyance of Limerick and Sandy. Limerick untied his ponytail in annoyance as Neptune arrogantly spoke about his recent heroic exploits at the training academy as he posed for pictures. Isla smiled at her male admirers and examined a smart-dressed lad named Charles Snow. Isla agreed to kiss him, yet this was interrupted by a stone-faced Sandy, who stated that this was her husband Focus's younger brother. Isla apologized before laughing and continuing to kiss Charles. Sandy angrily glared at Charles before walking off. Isla followed a stone-faced Andy into the limousine which took them to their accommodation apartment. Marta Creed, their stylist, appeared in their apartment barely seconds after they entered. Marta examined Neptune and asked him to perform some acrobatics. Much to the annoyance of Limerick, Neptune agreed and performed several backflips across the room before landing on the sofa. Neptune looked at Isla, who smirked at him. Marta glanced at the pair's olive skin tone and olive solid build before snapping her fingers at her team of stylists. Marta smiled at Neptune's bulging muscles before asking him if he would like to be dressed in a net. Neptune attempted to argue about this decision, but Limerick gave him a stern glare and he paused mid-sentence. Isla marveled at the sketches Marta had prepared for the pair. Neptune appeared unhappy, yet he finally consented and examined the nets. The pair were taken down to the Avenue of the Tributes in order for the tribute parade to begin. Neptune and Isla were dressed in a mixture of netting and seaweed. Neptune could be seen glaring angrily at Limerick for forcing him to wear nets for the parade. Sandy reminded Neptune that his bulging muscles were extremely expressed underneath the net, and although Neptune snapped at her and told her that whilst he liked his muscles, he did not like being paraded naked outside an entire city. Meanwhile, Casco presented Fur and Jess each with a helmet with horns at the top. As they were ready for the parade long before it started, the pair discussed training the next day. Casco explained a new station will be added to the training center, whilst Jess examined the District 9 tributes in front of them. Odious from 2 earned the title of Best Dressed, which made him the first ever solo tribute to win this title. Odious and his district partner, Paula, had been dressed in traditional gladiator costumes. It turned out that these costumes were extremely scant. Odious's bulging muscles were emphasized and he earned the role of Best Dressed, much to the happiness of Icarus Dalton and Magnus Splint. The pairs from 4 and 10 glanced at each other as 4 roared and drew attention to himself. The crowd cheered at his horns and he raised his arms in triumph. The crowd cheered even more, but they soon began focusing on Neptune, whose bulging muscles were emphasized under the scant net he was dressed in. Isla was praised for her beauty and she cheered, before shifting the position of her outfit in order to show more of her toned body. As soon as the tributes entered the training center the next day, they were shocked to see a 50-meter swimming pool had been installed on the floor. Diving boards were placed at the edge of the pool, and on the wall, each tribute was issued a swimsuit. Master of Training Casco Astriana gladly announced that he hoped most tributes would take the time to learn how to swim, as they could use this knowledge to their advantage in the arena. Fur walked towards his mentor and training master and asked him if this year's arena would contain water. Casco reminded him that even though he was master of training, he did not have access to confidential game maker information, such as the nature of this year's arena. Casco smirked and leaned in towards Fur before whispering, "Get in the pool." Neptune immediately changed into the swimsuit and dove into the water. He swam gracefully and performed a stroke known as butterfly. Calyx and Hart, both from 1, Odious and Paula, both from 2, Alec and Della, both from 3, and Spruce from 7 jumped into the water as well, and Calyx swam over to Neptune before asking to race him. As Isla got into the water, she shook her head at Neptune, yet it was too late and he and Calyx had already begun swimming. Neptune swam strongly and swam even faster than Calyx, before ultimately beating him in the race. Calyx angrily snarled, before storming over to the sword fighting station, grabbing a sword, pointing it to his neck, and pretending to slit his throat. He then glared at Neptune before pointing the sword at him and jokingly swinging it. This did not amuse Casco, however, and he quickly tasered Calyx in the back, which caused him to fall to the ground in pain. Neptune watched with a lack of expression at a writhing Calyx, who was shouting obscenities at Casco through his screams of pain. Fur suddenly approached Neptune from behind and tapped him on the shoulder, which caused him to spin around in shock. Isla raised her eyebrows at Fur, whilst Jess, who had been throwing knives at 83% accuracy, turned around and examined Neptune. Neptune raised his eyebrows and asked Fur what he wanted from him. Fur glanced at Casco, who was nodding, before asking Neptune if he wanted to race him in the pool. Neptune laughed, and Fur lowered his gaze, before sadly admitting that as he was from District 10, he did not have access to a swimming pool. They looked at each other until Fur began laughing and told Neptune he had trained in a swimming pool at his training academy in District 10. Neptune appeared puzzled to learn that there was a training academy in District 10, and he shouted at Isla to join them. Jess noticed Fur beckoning to her, yet she shook her head and Fur glanced at the District 4 tributes. Neptune explained that Fur was practically a career tribute like them, and Isla jokingly referred to him as the outlier career, which annoyed Fur at first, but he obliged to this nickname. They discussed the most recent games as case studies in their respective academies, before Fur mentioned the topic of iconic deaths. Neptune said he had enjoyed Icarus Dalton throwing tributes from the mountains the previous year, and Fur and Isla both agreed. Fur asked the pair why they were not allies with Calyx and the other careers. Isla replied that they did not trust Calyx and the others, which made Fur nod in agreement. The trio agreed to form an alliance in the arena, and Fur and Neptune exchanged their knowledge on how to use a trident. Fur had never actually used a trident, but as he was efficient with a pitchfork, it was not very difficult for him to use a trident. The trio spent the rest of the day using spears and occasionally swam in the pool whilst taunting Alec and Della, both from 3, and Twila from 8, due to them being unable to stay afloat. Back in the accommodation apartment, Limerick and Sandy spoke about Fur over dinner with Neptune and Isla. Limerick appeared concerned about Fur, while Sandy told Neptune that Isla and Fur had been trained for the games and would easily turn on them. 6 floors above, Casco appeared annoyed that Jess had not made any contact with the other tributes, whilst he congratulated Fur for starting an alliance with the tributes from 4. Before letting her go to bed, Casco put an arm in front of Jess and told her that she would have to start an alliance with the District 4 tributes in 4. Jess angrily agreed, before pushing Casco out of her way and walking towards her quarters. As Jess grudgingly walked over to Neptune, Isla, and Fur the next day, a scream was heard from the swimming pool. The group turned around to see an insane lad named Burn from 5 pushing the heads of Train and Tamora, both from 6, underwater, while Spruce from 7 was trying to stop him. Calyx, Odious, and Spud from 11 were crossing over and trying to restrain an insane Burn, yet their efforts were in vain. Enraged with Burn for attempting to kill 2 tributes before the games had even begun, Casco marched over to Burn and tasered him in the neck, which threw him back several feet and caused him to gasp for breath and scream in pain. Casco helped Train and Tamura up, before asking if they were okay. He awarded Calyx, Odious, Spruce, and Spud for their heroic actions by giving them advice with a weapon of their choice. As Burn got to his feet, Casco angrily slapped him in the mouth, which knocked him unconscious, and he had to be taken back to his quarters by guards, whilst Lynette Laurier was muttering anxiously to herself. Jess finally asked Fur if she could join his alliance, and to her surprise, Neptune and Isla gladly agreed to this and asked her if she wanted to learn how to swim. Jess gladly agreed, and as Neptune was explaining the basics of treading water to her, Isla asked Fur who he wanted to target during the bloodbath. Fur pointed towards Odious, Burn, and Train, which made Isla nod in approval. Isla then pointed towards Tamora and Holly from 7, yet she noticed Paula from 2 and said, "She looks ugly," before pointing at her as well. Neptune and Jess joined them, and Neptune pointed at Calyx and Hart. Jess appeared uncomfortable by this, and instead requested to practice with weapons. The group agreed and they walked over to the Trident training station. Neptune explained how to throw it at several angles to Jess, whilst Fur and Isla helped each other out and gave each other tips. They spent the rest of the day traveling to different stations and practicing with tridents, spears, and throwing knives, and by the end of the day they were decent with these weapons. The next day, tributes were awoken by their mentors for the assessment of tributes. Calyx and Hart arrogantly danced in front of the other tributes before walking in for their assessment. After displays of sword fighting and knife throwing, they both scored a 9. Odious and Paula strutted into the room while smacking their lips, and they walked out with scores of 8 and 10 respectively. Alec and Della appeared nervous, but scored a reasonable 5. Neptune was then called and he announced that he would be swimming. Before the game makers could react, he leapt into the water and swam as quickly as he could. After 2 minutes, he had completed 7 lengths and got up, before grabbing a trident and weaving it in several motions that left little doubt of his expertise. He did the same with his spear, and he ultimately walked out with a score of 10. Isla was called after Neptune and she glanced at Fur. As soon as she entered the room, she ripped off most of her outer garments and began an acrobatic routine. She drew several knives and used the survival supplies to build a snare and to weave notes and nets, which she could potentially use to her advantage in the arena, which saw her earn a 10, the same score as Neptune. Spruce entered and performed expert axing skills before leaving with a score of 9. When it was Fur's turn, he announced that he would be using a trident, a spear, and a pitchfork. He impressed the game makers by throwing all three of them simultaneously at a target with such force that his shirt began ripping at the seams. He finished the obstacle course in 6 minutes, which earned him a reasonably high score of 9. Jess appeared a bit nervous when she was called, but she still managed to walk in. She used her survival skills to paint several knots, and used her artistic skills to make it look like a tribute to sleeping in the pool, when in reality it was simply a rock tied to vines and covered in a jacket. Jess impressed the game makers with this display of talent and earned a 7. Burn, Train, Tamora, and Twyla each scored between a 6 and a 3, whilst Spud scored a 7. Most of the other tributes scored relatively average scores. The interviews took place the next night and were conducted by Priscilla Price. As he had retired from his role in the training center, Rubius happily agreed to conduct the interviews with Priscilla. With the general arrogance projected from District 1 tributes, Calux spoke about his skills and his accomplishments in the training center. Rubius could be seen getting annoyed by his arrogance, and he could be seen rolling his eyes and Calux continued ranting. Odious and Rubius began discussing Odious's reaping games in District 2, which he had won by pinching the nerve on the back of the neck of his opponents, which had caused them to fall asleep. When asked about his strategy, Odious simply grinned and replied that as he had been eliminated from the reaping games the previous year, he knew the humiliation of being eliminated whilst conscious, and he had put his opponents to sleep in order to spare them from this humiliation. The interviews of Alec and Della were rather dull, with the pair talking about technological components and batteries they had researched. The crowd was bored by this and were delighted when Isla made her way to the stage in a dazzling net. She proudly lifted it up and began speaking gleefully to Priscilla and Rubius about her excitement for the upcoming games. Isla spoke about how she was going to make District 4 proud this year. Priscilla asked her, as she did with all the other tributes, if she had a boyfriend, and Isla grinned before saying that she was dating Gil Huxley, the younger brother of her district partner. Neptune's interview took place, and he was pleased by the excitement from the audience after Isla's confession. Priscilla asked him what he thought of his district partner dating his brother, yet he ignored this and spoke about his accomplishments in the training center. He flexed his arms underneath the net he was wearing, before telling Priscilla and Rubius that anyone who doesn't volunteer is an idiot. This seemed to impress Rubius, and he began asking Neptune why he had volunteered. Neptune grinned smugly before saying, "I was born to do it." Spruce's interview was worth mentioning as he spoke about his job as a Tracker Jackal removal crew member back in District 7, which had given him all sorts of opportunities to observe different insects and seemed to go well with capital citizens, who were clearly interested in his unusual job. When it was Jess's turn, she spoke about her job as a brand labeler, which seemed to bore capital citizens. Fur's interview was rather fun. Fur was condemned for his bravery by Rubius. Fur calmly replied that one did not need bravery in order to volunteer, but just needed to be patriotic to their district. Rubius brought up Fur's high training score and told him his odds of victory were 4-1. Fur raised his eyebrows and asked about the other tributes, and Rubius replied that Calux had scored odds of 3-1, which angered Fur. After questions about what he would be expecting in the arena, Fur smiled and told Rubius that he had spent the past 8 years training for the games without his parents' knowledge, and that he was very prepared for the games. Spud spoke about his life back in District 11, which bored the audience. The tributes from 12 were no better and bored the audience as well. Bourne was jeered by the audience during his interview because of his insanity and stupidity during the training period. Finally, to the relief of the audience, game maker Elias Friend arrived on the stage to a standing ovation. After being interviewed about the success of the previous year's games, Friend spoke about how he hoped this year's games would be as good as the previous year's games. After the interview, despite most tributes being sleepy, a ball was held for the tributes. They were ordered by their mentors to dance to the tribute of both the opposite gender and of another district. Fur happily agreed to dance with Isla, whilst Neptune danced with Jess. To please Sandy and Casco, Isla and Fur began kissing against a wall, much to Neptune's annoyance.